Howdy, everybody. Okay, it's gonna be a little different than our usual live stream. Normally, I have a topic. We kind of do pro and con, against and for, devil's advocate and not devil's advocate, however you wanna put it, right? Um, this is gonna be a little different. So I received an email yesterday asking for some plant help. And unlike Stephen P., I don't just verbally abuse my plants until they fall into health. Uh, but I thought it would be fun to walk through kind of the process I would use when troubleshooting plants, whether they're my own or someone else's. And it's a little different when it's someone else's, right? Because I'm not staring at the aquarium. I'm not the one who's in control, so to speak, of how I do things in this. But this person gave me such a detailed email, and I had a couple of short follow-ups today that it made it possible to kind of get a good idea of what's going on. So I'm going to start with the email, and I'll read what's going on to you guys. And then I have a couple of different pictures to show you, a video, and then we'll start walking through some of my initial questions and the process that I would take to fix this. So with that being said, let me pull up my email here. I don't want to show this on screen because I don't want to like give away this person's personal information or anything. That doesn't seem right. So I'm at a loss as to what I'm dealing with. Pictured below is an example of one of the plants needlessly suffering. Leaves turn brown like this. And so since we're talking about that, we'll show the exact plant, right? And I've kind of zoomed in on this image a little bit just to make it really, really apparent. So you can kind of see we're dealing with some brown fringing toward the end of the plant, and it's slowly kind of deteriorating and dying off in the foliage. But if we look at some of the younger foliage, aka the smaller leaves, we don't see that present. So it's mostly our mature growth that is dealing with this problem. There's a few plants with pinholes. I've changed my ferts and added ferts, changed lighting. Nothing I've tried has helped. This isn't the only plant suffering. It seems it's only the medium to highlight plants doing this, as the slow growers, Anubias, Crips, etc., are doing beautifully. To me, that points to a deficiency. Initially, what I would say is that this is a really good suspicion. However, we'll dig a little deeper, but the deficiency might be different than you think. And I say this because I have some head knowledge, right? I've read this whole thing. Anyway, however, the Rotala wallichii is doing fantastic. How does that happen? With the pinholes, I added more potassium, still getting them with the current dosage regime. See below. I added more phosphate since diagrams, don't laugh. I suggest the diagrams to folks all the time. Why would I laugh other than like laughing at the whole kind of like, hey, don't laugh, don't shame me. It's like I find that funny because I'm the person who would say like don't laugh, even though I kind of want you to a little bit. Anyway, suggest it might be a phosphate deficiency. I tried lowering the light intensity, thinking if I did that, then it wouldn't be using so many nutrients and perhaps correct the deficiency, but no changes. The plants are growing, but for example, on the plant pictures, the leaves start going the second node from the top. So we're not at the very top, the newest growth. We're the growth underneath, right? And not like immediate underneath. We're a couple nodes down. So it's our more mature and old growth that we're seeing this happen to. Stats. This is a 12-gallon rimless long. The tank is 9.5 inches tall, planted heavily, and medium livestock. There's RO water. The tap water is liquid rock, remineralized with shrimpy GH KH plus to a GH of 9 and a KH of 4. These results are from an API liquid test kit. I increased it from 7 and 3 respectively, thinking maybe it's calcium. Not a bad suspicion, but typically when we see calcium deficiencies, we're going to see curling in the leaves. And most usually it's curling downward. Sometimes, depending on the species, they will curl like upward, but most commonly it's a kind of a downward curl when we have a calcium deficiency. And a lot of that just has to do with the basically think of like the stem portions within the leaf, right? Those rigid points. It's like having kind of brittle bones. We'll put this in quotation marks. They're not really bones, but they are just not as much strength, so they kind of droop as you get toward the far end of the leaf. Again, I feel like I've tried everything and haven't made progress. CO2 indicator is lime green. Here's one of our first clues. We're using CO2. So, I mean, we've got a number of clues so far, but this is one of the clues I want to key in on. We are using CO2. Fluval light, Fluval 3 light hangs about 8 inches from the water surface, so we've got a good distance on the light, but that's a fairly powerful light for a relatively shallow tank. Light graph is attached, so let me get you the light program they're using. It'll probably look really familiar. This is in Pro mode. This is very reminiscent, if not exactly one of my personal settings, which I would say I love the fact that you trusted me with your tank as far as choosing a setting that I like on a lot of my shallow tanks. So we've got, if we look at this overall, right, we start with a bit of blue in the morning. We go into those warmer reds and stuff until we start hitting our sunset and it all tapers off. Our cool white, our bright white, and our warm white are all at the highest points with no light exceeding about 70, 75. I can't remember the exact settings off the top of my head. I could probably pull the program up on my phone, but will not waste that much time. Okay, so this is our light graph root tabs from the Aquarium Co-op variety. Easy green at 2 milliliters per day, up from 1.5 milliliter, and I'm hesitant to add more due to the nitrates. Perhaps whatever is limiting the growth keeps the plants from using nitrates up more quickly. Easy potassium, right? We were dealing with a pinhole problem, so it makes sense to add a little extra potassium. It's the most common nutrient deficiency that leads to pinholes at 1.5 milliliters per day. Easy iron at 0.5 milliliters per day. This is a much more complicated regime than I would do. And not to say, I'm not saying that like you should change. I'm just saying this is more in-depth than me. I take an easier route usually with my own tanks, but I'm also typically not doing a big blend of high demand and low demand plants. I tend to try and keep everything in the low medium unless I'm like on a very specific project tank, and then I have a lot of like medium high altogether. That's just a personal choice. It tends to be the plants that I like putting together and how they just end up to have that requirement. It's not like it's designed any special way. Anyway, back on track. And then Seachem phosphorus at 1.5 milliliters per day was getting green spot algae, which has resolved. Which is interesting because a lot of times adding phosphorus or phosphates can lead to some level of surface algae. Usually like brown algae is most of your diatomaceous, if we want to be more fancy, your diatom algae, or some like surface spot algae, but it's good to know that that's resolved. Was using fluval stratum with root tabs. It was old and getting compacted, so I switched to an inert, coarse lava rock sand. This is another thing. We're using a, I'm going to pull our light program down here. We're using a inert substrate, so it's not something that's going to pull down into the roots. However, we're dealing with mostly stems, and they tend to feed primarily from the water column, and those are our problem children right now. The Amanos easily yanked plants out of the fluval stratum. There's that too. I opened some easy root tabs and sprinkled it all over the bottom, placed the substrate on top, then targeted root tabs near heavy root feeders. This is all good. I like all of this. But even with the fluval stratum, plants were doing this, which is to say the browning problem we're running into. It's water change day today, and I did a quick test strip. Picture attached. Let's bring that up. Boom, here's our tests. Anubias, Crips, and other slower growing plants are doing great. Healthy, new growth, old leaves healthy too. No algae problems that cleaning crew isn't keeping up with. Perhaps a very minor dust algae on the glass. You're always going to have a little bit. You're always going to have a little bit unless you're like super meticulous and do crazy level, like green aqua level maintenance, okay? You're always going to have a little. Let me know if I'm missing any info you need. Trial and error so far has not gotten me anywhere. I feel like I'm complicating things way more than it should be. That is how I roll anyway. Thanks for your help you can give. Hope all is well with you and your family. Okay, so I want to key on that last little bit. Like, we're looking at our tests here. Iron, not super high. Copper, not super high. Nitrates at a good level, nothing crazy high, but also not crazy low. We're in somewhere that 25 to 50 kind of range. And that's fine. Like, 20 to 40 is a perfectly fine range of nitrates. Nitrite, 0. Chlorine, 0. Great. Our total hardness, we're not tipping the scales all the way, but we definitely are what would make sense with that GH of 9. But we're, or at least that's what this test is going to indicate. But that's still good. Like, general hardness to a certain extent isn't going to really kill you. Sometimes it can for certain plants, and that's something we need to consider. Alkalinity in general is looking good. Carbonate hardness, again, looking good. We looked at that test. And pH, kind of soft. Looks like you're about like 6.8 to 7, I would guess, just by looking at this in the photo. So relatively neutral and or slightly acidic, not soft, in our testing. Okay. So we don't have any tests that are like really crazy or out of whack. And now I've had a few follow-up questions, and let me show you what I asked. Hold on. My email is like burying things because, you know. So I asked these following questions. Approximately how long has the tank been running? How long have the struggling plants been in the tank? And is the browning on old or new growth? And I kind of sped read this while I was between meetings at work, which would indicate the last question. If I read it as in detailed as we just did, I would know, like, top growth is fine, lower growth is bad, therefore new growth is okay. Older growth is what's struggling. So last question, kind of irrelevant. Tank has been running for over a year, had been constant battle with staghorn and blackbrush algae. Finally got that figured out, no more problems with the algae, but nothing has ever grown well. The plants in the tank have been in there since mid-March. So not super long, but long enough to where we're not, or should not, be dealing with conversion. These plants should have been converted by now, and based on how we're getting new growth and it looks healthy, that is the case. And this is where I'm asking these questions because sometimes it's really easy for us to panic when we put new plants in, they start dying, but our new growth looks okay, and we kind of like misdiagnose things in our head as a nutrient deficiency as opposed to the conversion process. So there's that, and then I just followed up that if you don't mind, I'm going to use this as a live stream topic. And the person responded like, hey, I can send you a video. So let's look at that video real fast. And then I'll come back to actively watching chat and we'll walk through my process based on the information we've been given and where I think I would make some adjustments and what I think the problem is, which is probably wrong. Let's be honest. I'm not perfect. So here's our tank. It's a very pretty tank. I love the layout. I love the hardscape. So we can see, as mentioned, those Anubiases are looking pretty good. Looks like we've got some Sawasser there that's doing pretty great. Got probably a lily in the back that looks okay. As we kind of pan through, a lot of our plants that have newish growth look pretty good. Also CPDs, a little bit of love and credit there. So most of it, we can see like some of these stems, they look like they're struggling, but we see that like Willicii there is doing kind of okay, but if you look toward the very bottom of it, that stem is looking a little bare and has some indications of what we need to be looking at for our problem child. So we come kind of over the top, and from the top we see a lot of healthy upper growth, but again, that lower growth is where we're starting to have problems. Now Willicii in the back is actually looking great. It's got good color. Again, as we pan through here, you'll see like, here's one of the plants where we had the quick zoom in. We definitely see some pinholes and some of the browning, some of that stuff that's going on where our like true problem child is, right? But overall, a majority of the plants look relatively healthy. We've got a like kind of aging lily leaf at the top there. They're naturally going to do that, but we look at all the lower growth that's in there looking relatively healthy. So, pretty good look at this tank. But we're not seeing a couple of things, right? The other thing that was noted is that the diffuser that looks like it's in the tank is actually just oxygen. It's just an air pump. So that one that we see right there is just an air pump. This is all running on an inline reactor for CO2. So you can see those lower leaves definitely struggling there. And in general, like some of the older growth is where we're having problems. Our new growth is relatively clean and healthy looking. And this is where we can clue into a number of different things. Autosynchronous right there. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the video now because I think we've got a good idea of what's going on. And for those of you, oh, Laura, great, you're in chat. This is why tank. Oh yeah, I panic. You weren't necessarily sure if you're going to make it, but good to see you. Okay, so I want to like quickly run through chat. I just want to see if anybody's like proposed their own thoughts on this, right? Other than Queen Blev ghosting, I'm naming one of my baby goldfish Bentley. If you happen to have one that has close to the Kohaku pattern, which you'd have to have a Shibunkin for that. I'm just saying, it's a personal favorite. That's my favorite pattern. But yeah. Okay, so if we were to consult a lot of our deficiency charts, pinholes will tell us right away, usually potassium. We're dosing potassium, and that's not something where the existing leaves with pinholes are going to magically fix themselves. It's going to prevent seeing those pinholes in newer growth. And all of our newer growth so far has been looking pretty healthy. But where we're seeing the bigger problem is when we get those browning at the fringes and it starts slowly deteriorating away. Now, if we were to do my favorite search in the world, aquarium, plant, nutrient, deficiency chart, right? And Laura, you said you looked at this chart too, and I would never laugh at you or shame you in the sense of saying that's a bad thing. This is what I do. I frequently consult this because it's hard to perfectly memorize everything, especially when it comes to not just our macros, but our micros. So if we look at a macro level, right? And I'm not going to show the chart right now. I'm just going to explain things. The most common thing where we see browning on the outside, yellowing into the green, is nitrogen deficiency. But we have pretty good nitrates in the tank, right? We saw we're somewhere between, on the test, 25 and 50. We're probably realistically sitting in that 20 to 40 parts per million range, just plenty. If that's commonly available, that should be sufficient. We're not so dense in our growth that we're running low on nitrates, right? And we are using root tabs in the soil, despite the fact we have inert soil, to help add some root level feeding for the plants that need it the most, like that lily as an example. The other thing we could potentially see is brown splotches is where we would say something of a like phosphate deficiency, right? And that's usually you'd see like the whole leaf kind of yellowish or lighter green with brown splotches, as opposed to browning at the edges and then slowly moving in. However, one thing we should also consult is how our micronutrients will do this. So I'm going to pull up an even bigger chart. And for those of you who want a quick link to this chart, this is my like favorite of the micronutrient deficiency charts. I know it's not perfect. It's just sharing basically an image online, but I love this one. So if we look around at that, potassium can also be that browning on the outside, but usually it's shown with yellow throughout the whole leaf, and the veining of the leaf tends to stay bright green. We can see some kind of deterioration or issues from not enough sulfur or potentially manganese, which might look kind of what we're looking at here, where we're seeing some stuff. Or even some of your browning can come from molybdenum being low. Usually this is splotchy, kind of how we showed at our macro level, but these are things to think about. Now, if we were dealing with leaves that were particularly short, especially if some of our newer growth was not growing out to full size, that typically is where we look at a phosphorus deficiency. I don't know, this is a little much, right? Because we're not directly addressing, but we kind of want we kind of want to slowly take our process, think about what's going on, and just walk down it. I do this so often. I will sit there on my phone with a chart. I'll zoom in because the screen's too small and I'm old and my eyes suck. But I'll sit there and I will walk down and remind myself every time, even though I've done this for years at this point, this has been my process. I walk through it slowly to get an idea of how many like little things look like they could be, this might be a little bit of the micro, or is it obvious macro deficiency? And if I see kind of a thing where it's like, it might be a little of both, that helps me understand the approach I want to take. But here's where the charts can't help us, okay? So one of the things that you mentioned, Laura, is that you have brought your light power down a little bit because you were worried that too much light was making them absorb too much nutrients. And my response to that is this. Usually that helps. However, in the case of where we're injecting CO2 into the aquarium, the CO2 is like steroids, right? It provides more and more carbon available to the plant, and that's one of the most important things it needs for growth. But when it has a significant amount of carbon and still has good light, even if it might not be the light it needs, it's going to try and grow and grow and grow. And what we will notice is if older growth, that lower growth on stems, or the most established early growth toward the center of some of our rhizome plants, etc., if that's where we're seeing nutrient deficiencies show up, typically to me, what that says is the plant is trying to grow so much, but it doesn't have enough of something to match the amount of carbon and or light available. Usually with injected CO2, it's the carbon that's available that is causing some of our problem. That what it starts doing is consuming and trying to reabsorb some of the nutrients from its eldest growth to fuel that continual new growth. So in this case, here's the first step I would do. We would want to know what our estimated amount of CO2 is. And I know you're using a checker and you're kind of relying on whether it's like lime green or not. This is where I hate CO2 checkers personally. However, I understand why a lot of people use them because it's an easy visual reference. I like trying to control my bubble count. And it's a little harder with an inline reactor, admittedly, but we can do it at the regulator level, right? So Mike says I'm sticking with zinc, which is possible. But so my example would be this, since we have such a small tank and we're using a reactor, that means that lower amounts of CO2 being injected can more efficiently dissolve into the water column. So despite the fact that that CO2 checker is lime green, we might actually have a higher level of parts per million of CO2 than we really need in that aquarium. So let's say we were doing 3 bubbles a second. I would bring it down to 2. I might even bring it down to 1. And the reason why I say this is I want to see if by just adjusting the volume of CO2, if that prevents the older growth from having its problem as quickly as it has been. Because that would tell me there's so much carbon available that it's growing faster than it can absorb the other nutrients it needs. And that our lighting is okay. Here's the second piece of the puzzle. In stems, when we see lower growth dying off, that tends, not always, right? This is the problem with plants. It's so complicated, but it tends to indicate that we don't have enough light penetration coming down to the lower growth. So those plants understand like, well, these leaves aren't being as efficient. So we're going to let those get reabsorbed and push all of our work toward the most efficient photosynthesizing leaves, aka all the stuff in the upper levels of the plant. So we could, in theory, have hurt ourselves by bringing that light level down despite keeping the CO2 at its current level. So the way that I would start approaching this is I don't necessarily think that this is purely a nutrient deficiency issue. I would keep all of our nutrients at their current pace. And what I would do is bring the CO2 down a little bit. So again, if you're at like 3 bubbles, cut it down to like 2, right? And we want to tinker in little bits. What I would do from here is pretty simple. I would only cut the CO2 and adjust nothing else. And the reason why I do this is if we're adjusting 5 or 6 things at once, we don't know which one is helping us and which one is hurting us because we're adding too much complication. And this is the part where we really have to kind of rein in our want to magically fix everything at once and realize that, hey, all of our new growth is pretty healthy, which means we're not going to lose the plants entirely. We just need to kind of balance out how healthy they are long term. So in the short term, we can kind of trim that new growth off, replant it, and kind of reestablish those plants and be okay as we slowly tinker and figure this problem out. I want to start with CO2 because I feel like looking at your tests that most of your nutrients are okay. You're making some adjustments to some of the other problems you've been seeing, but I feel like because there is potentially just too much carbon available, given the size of the tank and the amount of planting, and what I mean by amount of planting is you have a lot of low demand plants and only a few high demand plants. And potentially those high demand plants just are raking in so much carbon and going so hog wild that they're effectively consuming themselves in the process because they're pushing growth so hard they can't sustain their more mature growth, if that makes sense. I know this probably sounds like a little crazy, but plants are weird, okay? They're weird organisms. We can't think of them like we think our own bodies necessarily. So I'm going to start with CO2. Step at least like 2 to 3 weeks. And then what I want to do is I want to kind of continuously test, because if I'm seeing anything be pushing out of the ordinary, like if all of a sudden by dialing that CO2 back, my nitrates spike out of control, right? That's going to tell me, okay, that CO2 might have been what the tank was so used to that I need to now dial back a little bit of the nutrients. But if the nutrients stay relatively stable to what they are now, which I feel they're all in a pretty healthy range, then I would just be watching the growth. And are we seeing that same process? And we might need to go longer. We might need to go a month, month and a half, something like that, to see if that elder growth, right, our mature leaves, are dying as quickly as they were previously. Because if we dial the CO2 back and we're still having the same problem, then my second step is adjusting light. Because it might very well be that somehow the plant has it in its like system, the way that it reacts, right? The way that it's like, I prioritize this, that we're not giving quite enough light to that lower growth, and thus that lower foliage is not synthesizing or photosynthesizing, let's be more specific, as efficiently. And so the plant is realizing like, hey, this foliage down here is not doing the job. Let's sacrifice it and really pump it toward the stuff that's all doing the really good work, because that's better for our health overall. And that's how we grow. And it's kind of like a continuous process, right? Because it grows up and then the lower parts struggle. It grows up and the lower parts struggle, and we're fighting that for a while. So if the CO2 alone is not our fix, then we're going to adjust the light, and we're going to bring it up just a little bit. Not a ton. We're not maxing everything at 100%. But if like our tops are 70, we'll crank them to 80, right? We just kind of bump everything up except maybe the blues, because a shallower tank, I get a little worried about that blackbeard algae we were dealing with before. And there you go. There's another great detail. When I lowered the light intensity, things started getting leggy. So what they're doing is they're trying to reach for that extra light. So they probably really want that extra light. But I would say let's start with the CO2, because the CO2 is helping it grow faster, and that can help it get leggy. So let's start with the CO2. Let's give it at least 3 weeks. I would say a month to a month and a half is preferable, but just monitor your growth. See what's happening. Get used to those things, right? Then we can look at changing the light and kind of increasing the light. Because if we're still seeing it get leggy, but we're starting to see that growth stay longer and not have as much trouble, now we want to increase the light, and that might help get those plants a little more dense, a little happier, and prevent some of those issues. If these two things are not enough, and again, similar amount of time, if you need to adjust light, do that for at least another month and monitor. I know this is slow. I know this is kind of taxing, but this is how you've kind of long-term fix your aquarium. It's unfortunately not an easy, like, flip the switch and everything's fine. It is patience and slowly tinkering that gets us to the best long-term success. Then and only then am I going to see, unless some crazy panic happens, and again, email me as stuff is going on. We'll work together through this, okay? Then and only then would I start looking at adjusting my nutrient regime anymore. And keep testing, make sure we're watching our tests and nothing's getting out of control. But as long as everything's staying in control in our nutrients, and then we're slowly tinkering with those other factors, I think that's going to help us find success. Okay, so that's how I would troubleshoot this. This is the path I would take, and we'll have a little check-in at some point. Sound good? I hope so. Robert Johnston. I'm no plant expert, but I have found some plants I've had improvement when I increase some water flow. That's also a good thing. Like sometimes if you have not a lot of flow, you might have areas of the tank that aren't as efficiently getting nutrients, or they might not get as much of the like CO2 dispersion. But given that we're on an inline reactor, I'm guessing we have some kind of small canister. I would think we probably have enough water movement to make sure that that's not the problem. And usually I would say is if we were having water movement issues, we might see like surface algae on some of those like Anubias leaves and things like that. And given that we weren't seeing that in the video, I think it's less likely to be flow related, but that is a good point and something worth paying attention to, is that flow can really matter for distribution of nutrients, CO2, preventing detritus from sitting on things, because that can cause other problems, etc., etc., etc. So yeah. Alberto C., what's your advice for keeping Java Fern looking nice? Potassium. Java Fern is kind of a potassium hound. So the two things, at least for a lot of the Java Ferns that I tend to keep. So needle leaf, standard Java Fern, Wendelov, they don't really need high levels of light. They typically do okay with about medium or even low light. Were needle leaf or like Trident or Thor's hammer, if you're familiar with those, the ones that have thinner leaves. Those are the ones where the slightly higher light intensity matters. But for your broader leaf ones, and Wendelov counts, even though it's got the lacy tips, right? They really don't need much more than about medium and or low light. It's more about making sure that they tend to have a longer exposure of light. So similar to a lot of sword plants, they tend to be better with less intensity of light for a longer duration, because they come from areas where they are very tropical. They have a lot more sun naturally. So we kind of want to try to replicate that a little bit, especially if we're very Java Fern heavy, like several of my tanks are. You'll notice that like the Guppy Mansion, which has a lot of Java Fern in it, and several of my other tanks, honestly, I use a lot of Java Fern because I love that plant. And that's all because of George Farmer. So thanks, George. That guy really turned me on into loving Java Fern way more than I used to. But longer duration, longer photo period, if you want to get super technical, right, is what they're kind of used to. So if we naturally provide, instead of 8 hours of light at, say, 75% light power, if we did 50% or even 45% light power, but we did it for 12 hours, those tend to be the things that make things like your broader leaf Java Ferns and a lot of your swords happier. They tend to like longer exposure time at lower intensity, where a lot of our like finer leaf things tend to want that higher intensity because they don't have as much surface to gather up that light to do that photosynthetic work, right? So we want stronger light so that they can more efficiently pull that in and do their job. Also, just they're all potassium hounds. So when you can, little supplement helps a lot. Little supplement goes a long way. Okay, hope that helps. The last thing, to go back to our project tank, the last thing I will say is the first nutrient that we're going to adjust or add would just be something like C-Chem's Trace. I would want to look at adjusting a very low additive of all our micronutrients. You could also use, as a replacement to Trace and the Easy Potassium, you could use Brightwell's Flora and Multi. Because Flora and Multi is all the micros plus potassium. It's part of the reason why it's like one of the biggest like tools in my arsenal when it comes to doing any of my dosing, because it gives me a lot of the stuff that, while it's not as necessary in big amounts, it gives me the things that are often are a little overlooked or not as plentiful in a lot of our all-in-ones. So it's a good supplement to something like Easy Green, as an example. I still use Easy Green a lot. People might be surprised because I've ragged on Co-op a little bit recently, but I've also given them love. But I still love their fertilizer. So, what do you do? But however, it's easy green and floor and multi. Because anytime I notice something where I'm like, micros might be off, or I have a fairly dense number of fish, I don't necessarily need the nitrate that's in easy green. I go to the micros plus potassium. Because those cover the other bases that I care about the most in those all-in-ones. Just the way I do things. Might not be perfect for you, but might also help you. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Lots of hellos. And then Stephen P. in all his glory. Dr. Maz, good to see you, buddy. Dr. Mazerall. The Amazon Research Center for Ornamental Fishes. My fix is just to rip them out of the tank since I have a black thumb with aquarium plants, unless it's duckweed. I'm going to find a way to get you good at least one other plan. By hook or by crook, I will find a way. I will find a way. I'm telling you this right now, Dr. Maz. Find a way. Okay, good. I'm caught up. I can scroll back down and get to where I'm not caught up. My phone's like AI assistant keeps trying to turn itself on, and I hate it. Google's Gemini needs to chill out. It does this like all the time when I'm at work. I'll be doing random things for my actual job, and my phone will just like light up and try to do stuff, and it's like, quit it, just quit it. Oh, anyway. Okay, I'm gonna start with the CO2 and report back. Excellent. I thought Java Fern was one of the ones you berate into health. I mean, you kind of can. I feel like you could. I know so many people that really struggle with Java Fern, and I've tried really hard to help them. It's just some people, because of like the way their water is, Java Fern's just like, I don't wanna. And it sucks because it's such a cool plant. Leos, aquariums, and reptiles. Hey, buddy. Look, for a 40 breeder with a hairy puffer planted tank, what would you think would be the best setup for a Fluval 3.0? It really depends on the plants, right? Because hairy puffers, as an ambush predator, they don't necessarily want like super bright light. They kind of want things a little on the lower side, but it would depend on the plants we're using. Because if we have some highlight requirement plants, then we need to have a higher setting. My initial suspicion is that like my DaySim shallow version would probably be a good starting point, but we might need to make some adjustments to it. So kind of similar to this bad boy right here, right? Where we're not going crazy high, but since we are in a 40 breeder, we can go a little bit toward like that 70-ish% at our like absolute maximum for some of our whites. It helps a little bit, but it's not necessarily required. And then it would just be a matter of like, if you're using a lot of Java Fern and Anubias and all these things that don't require a lot of light, or swords as an example, well, we might even bring that down some. Because you might find that hairy puffer is even happier in slightly dimmer light because it's a little more akin to what it would deal with in nature, quotation marks. We're going to put this around there because a lot of the reason why their water is not as well lit has to do with the amount of natural like silt and various non-dissolved solids, maybe is the way to try and put it, that sit in the water stream. But I'm not a puffer guru. I'm not Preston John, so I can't give you perfect answers, but I can give you some semi-educated guesses and heavy education or heavy emphasis on the semi portion of semi-educated. Dwarf Sagittarius and Pokestemmons. So the Pokestemmons are going to grow so aggressively, you probably don't have to go crazy. But I would say like a medium level light. So you might look at like capping your light out as a start at about 65% to 60%. And having a slightly longer duration, maybe like instead of 6 hours or 7 hours, look at like 9 or 10, including your sunrise and sunset. Right, that's the other thing I want to keep in mind is that when I talk about these numbers, they include a sunrise and sunset, so it's not peak power for like 8 or 9 hours. It's the entirety of our schedule being that 9, maybe even 10 hours. But I would do honestly probably an hour and a half long sunrise and sunset for a hairy puffer. I tend to do that for almost all my tanks personally because I like that slower ramp up and down. But that also has to do with a lot of the fish I keep because they can be kind of skittish when lights just go on. Hope that helps. And a banana. What about Trident and Java Fern? I run a low-tech tank, no CO2. The new leaves grow nice but quickly develop brown, black spots and little holes. You're low on potassium. I thought Java Fern was easy, but mine never looked good. So when you get the brown spots and holes, it's almost always because, and the Java Fern is a potassium hog. There are a few plants out there that they really, really want higher and more elevated levels of specific nutrients. And in the case of basically every microsorum, which is the category that Java Ferns sit in, it is potassium. So get something like Easy Potassium. It's just a straight up, and yeah, I'm directly endorsing Aquarium Co-op's product because I love the fact that they brought out an easy potassium dose. If you don't have access to Aquarium Co-op stuff, Seachem has a potassium dosing product as well, where it's just potassium. Just add a little extra potassium, goes a long way. It's going to take time to kick in, and it's not going to like magically fix the holes and stuff in your current leaves, but you should see that reduce or go away entirely in all of the new foliage that you're dealing with. And as it starts to age, you shouldn't see those issues occurring. Hope that helps. Would that be the same for Anubias with the holes? Typically, anytime we see little pinholes, small holes, not like big chunks, right? That is almost always a potassium deficiency. There are some cases in some plants where it relates to other things, but almost always it's potassium. So that's where I would start, Danya, is I would start with potassium. And then if that doesn't resolve it, I'm going to put my email back in chat. I know usually it's like super available, but just in case, if you're on mobile, maybe you can't easily see the about section on my channel, and that makes it a bit of a bear. But it's always there. It's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. It's literally just my name with a dot between at Gmail. But if you struggle after trying that, and I would give it at least a month. I know that's a long time, but give it at least a month of lightly dosing potassium. See how that helps you. Both of you, both with the Trident Java Fern and with those Anubiases. And then if you're not seeing any significant improvement, shoot me an email. I'll help troubleshoot with you. I do warn you, sometimes I get super busy and I'm a little late. I was a little slow to respond, but I will get back to you and I will help you. Okay? And if all else fails, it might turn into an episode like this was, where we live troubleshoot your plant problem and we talk about course of action to take and where I think some of the problems might be, blah, 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 blah. And I talk too much, like always. How do you propagate Amazon swords aggressively? No. First, you have to yell on guard. And you have to produce a sword of your own. No, I'm not kidding. Okay. So typically what happens with Amazon swords and a majority of our sword plants, not all, there are some cases that don't follow this, but you should see this like kind of long flowering spike that comes out of it. And if you're not seeing that, it's not to a point of where it's going to propagate itself naturally. But basically you'll see this long kind of cord that comes out of the foliage itself, and it will grow almost to the top of your aquarium or lay completely atop your aquarium. It depends on how big your tank is. And what you should see over time is that it has a bunch of little buds on it, and if it's at the surface, it will open and flower. And it might even flower underwater, though the leaves and things will die fairly quickly. Or, sorry, the petals. I can English, right? Not really. But what should happen is that after those flowers are done blooming, you should see little baby swords start growing, and you might even get some little baby roots. What I typically do is I try to let the leaves get about that long, so it's about 2 to 2.5 inches or so. And then what I do is I go through and I cut them off of what we call the spathe, or sometimes we refer to it as a spike. It kind of depends on what word most people use. I tend to call it a spike, but the big cordy bit. It's like an umbilical cord. Think of it like that way. It's connecting little babies to mama plant, right? It's the best way to think about it, even though we don't necessarily call it an umbilical cord. But think about it like that way, all right. Anyway, I usually chop it to the sides so that there's almost none of that there. I leave a little just to make sure I'm not accidentally chopping part of the plant, and then you can plant it down in your substrate, and you have a brand new baby sword that will slowly grow out into a big ol' sword. That's all you do. Over time, when they're really happy, they'll start throwing those out a lot. and you will get a lot of swords, probably more swords than you ever wanted. But if you're not seeing those spikes yet, just wait. Sometimes some sword plants take a lot longer to get to that like happy point where they start producing those spikes and flowering and child plants. Hope that helps. Hope that helps. Lonnie, again, if you do happen to see them and you need some help with them, shoot me an email, okay? Robert Johnson, still wonder why Java Fern is considered an easy plant. I've killed everyone, even with loads of potassium. I think the problem is that a majority of places that have it as easy have naturally soft water. And one of the things that I have personally observed with Java Fern is, despite the fact that it comes from an area with semi-hard water, the cultivated Java Ferns that we're used to in the aquarium hobby really love soft water. They really love soft and slightly acidic water. So in a lot of people who have like either very heavy nutrient loads or they have a high pH, for some reason, Java Fern, despite getting everything else it needs, struggles with that harder, higher pH, especially higher pH water, to absorb the nutrients it needs, and just struggles and dies and struggles and dies. Ginger Graves, who's regularly in the replay crew or sometimes even live, she struggled for a long time, and I tried to help her, and eventually we kind of just were like, I think the pH of your water is too hard. It was like one of those things where it's like, good news, that's what bulbitis is for. So if you're struggling a lot with Java Fern, you might consider switching to bulbitis. It grows almost exactly the same way. It's a little darker green in its color, but beautiful, beautiful plant, and a lot more tolerant of harder water. So, option. What percent do you keep your blue light at? No more than 10, typically about 5. It depends on the tank and light requirements. I like putting them pretty low. I know some people in chat, Stephen P, will say that blue light causing algae is a myth, but every time that I've ever cranked blue light in any of my tanks, I tend to have more algae outbreaks than when I don't. So I will take my wives' tale and run and gun with it. I've also had a lot of people who have watched a number of my videos who have given me feedback that after reducing blue light, their algae problems significantly decreased or went away entirely. So it's not scientific because I don't have enough level of data to prove it. However, I feel like I proved it. Oh, here's another one. Stephen P. giving some great information that I'm neglecting to answer. The hard water habitats that in the wild where Java Fern naturally grow also happen to have high elevated levels of CO2, similar to what we get with CO2 injection. So if you have hard water, one of the things that might be your struggle point is that you don't have enough carbon available through injected gaseous CO2 to kind of overcome that problem that we see in aquariums. Most people try to keep their tanks low tech when they do Java Fern, and then the Java Fern goes, don't wanna, blah, right? So, thing to think about, not bad. Hey, for the record, Tom Barr also says it's a myth. I'm aware. I watched that episode like 3 times where you had Tom on. And I'm aware that people with significantly more plant knowledge, background, science level capability say it's a myth. But I don't care. My results tell me do this is okay. Not do this is not okay. And so I do this, which is to say, kick that blue light in the face and say, no, sir. You go low and you deal with it. It's just, I think it's a lot of like, when we find things that are successful for us, it doesn't matter who tells us what. If we're having success, why would we change it? Right? But if we're struggling, why not try something? Because even if it's not scientifically the right answer, if it works, and it's probably literally I've just brought down the overall amount of light in some way, shape, or form, and thus I've found the thing with my water in my aquariums that makes my plants happy. But what I would say to you is the following. It makes my plants happy. and it stops the algae. Winning combo. Combo unlocked. I keep to it. Right. It would be insane to change it. But again, I fully admit that scientifically speaking, it is not accurate. But my observed results tell me it is. So I'm going to stick to my guns and just be like, I don't care what you say, science. I'm going to be like other creators who talk about certain things and claim that they are right no matter what. Who could know what I'm talking about? Who could possibly know? I'm in a spicy mood today. I'm sorry. I was dealing both Sunday and Monday. I'm going to go a little off topic, and then I promise, Richard, I will get to your question about Severums. We had long outages of Comcast internet at my home both Sunday and Monday. Literally, like the entirety of standard business hours. No internet at home. And my wife was trying to do a bunch of things. She was supposed to do some stuff with her friend. She was getting really paranoid. She wouldn't be able to do that in the evening. I was trying to do some like preemptive work for myself that required internet. Couldn't do any of that. Yeah. So needless to say, I got a little spicy on the phone with Comcast during my drive home. And let me tell you something. For those of you who don't have to deal with Comcast, you're lucky. If you have fiber and you get good internet, I envy you. Because I do not have that available in my neighborhood. I only have Comcast or garbage DSL. And as you can imagine, doing live streams and uploading YouTube videos and my wife doing live streams, that kind of stuff. Lord, do I need that bandwidth. I just need to spike it straight into the veins, right? Go straight on Matrix style, cord in the back of my head, call it a day. But I have to deal with the devil that is Comcast. And when you are in a service outage with Comcast, you cannot contact customer service. They literally auto hang up on you. And if you try to talk to their chatbot, it auto tells you, oh, we can't help you until your service interruption is resolved. I'm a little frustrated at this. It angers me dearly. I understand why. You're trying to prevent congestion in your lines from all the pissed off people that don't have internet right now. But I can't even interact with the stupid chatbot or the online chat. Ooh. Anyway, so I call. About 50% of the options, including trying to contact the billing department over the phone, tell you now that you cannot do that over the phone anymore, and they just hang up on you automatically. I had to call, mind you, while driving, Comcast 5 different times to get through to someone to then be like, hey, I've had a bunch of service outages over the last 3 months, and especially in the last month, I've had 5. I've had 5 where I haven't been able to use my internet for almost an entire day. I work in tech, and I work from home. Work from home is a stretch, but that's YouTube. All right. Right. I'm losing money every time I don't have internet at home. They're like, well, sir, we can offer you a promotion to change your service. And I'm like, I don't want a promotion. I want a damn credit on my account because I haven't been able to use my internet for full uptime. You bastards. Needless to say, I got kind of spicy on the phone with some people because I was getting very frustrated at how they effectively refused to credit my account and kept trying to upsell me into a different promotion for even better service. And it's like, I literally pay probably more money than I ever should to Comcast because I just want to make sure I have the best upload speed, and Comcast upload speed is garbage considering what it could do. But yeah. Mike, you try to complain about your internet, and you can't complain about it because you don't have internet. Reminds me of South Park. It does sound like a total South Park scenario, doesn't it? All right. So we had the question, best plants with Severums. So in the case of Severums, here's my thing. You want something usually pre-established. So swords can do okay, but sometimes they will chew the swords up. So what you typically want is something that has a very robust and tough leaf. This is where we can look toward Anubiases, some Java ferns, or potentially Bulbitis, because if they're not easily chewable, the Severums tend to like pick at it a little bit and then give up. We don't want to use a lot of stems because they're just going to chew those to bits. We might consider some of the what was that plant I put in my aquarium? It's got the funny name. I can't pronounce. Where did I buy it? I bought it at Co-op. Hold on. It's literally the like carpeting plant that is in my under gravel tank. That looks far enough back. Might be that one. That was not it. Hold on. I'm trying to remember. I'm so bad at this right now because it's not. It's also I can't easily find Shantoto. Hey, quit barking out the window at the kids. We're going a little late today, so it's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Get up and grab her. Give me a half sec, okay? That'll quiet her down. Hey, you chill out. Where's my... Yeah, there he is. There, we'll try and calm her down this way. Give it up on the search for a plant. Basically, what you want is a tougher leaf plant, so they're less likely to keep trying to bite at it. And you really want it well established. So if you have an established Severum tank, or you're trying to put new plants in it, that's really tough because they'll basically pull them up and deroot them over and over again. And that's kind of a nightmare. Look how happy she is. Oh. So you can create like a baby. Look. Look. Oh, he's gonna bite me. Yes. Yes. Oh, yes. That's a good girl. Okay, can we be quiet now? Can we be quiet? Easy, easy, easy. Don't get squirrely on me. Yeah. Hi. Hi. Silly dog. Silly dog. Don't go barking. Come here. Come here. That's what it is, Jeff C. I can never pronounce that thing. It takes me... the video where I first put it in, you have no clue how many takes I did that I edited out, horribly pronouncing that word over and over again. Over and over again. It was the worst. Oh, Laura, I feel like an idiot because they make me start screaming into the phone representative. Yeah, Comcast doesn't even have that anymore. You can't say agent or representative. It won't get you to anything. It's all punching numbers on a pad on purpose. Those bastards. Bastards. All right. Marsilia is actually another good one, but it's really easy to uproot as a carpenter. So I would kind of avoid that. All right. There was one other question I want to grab real fast, and then we will be done for the evening, folks. I want to thank you so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of alternative version of the stream. Replay crew, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this, but kind of troubleshooting a plant live. I had fun with it. Maybe we do more of these. I don't know. I feel like they can be helpful. David Bentley, if you remember, I had trouble with JF. Java Fern. We're just talking about Java Fern, and my brain went, what's JF? Over time, my water is 6.4 pH, 10 nitrates, 4 years of maturity. Now my Java Fern issues are gone. Thanks for your help. We got there. We got there. I'm glad. I will say this. A healthy amount of Java Fern, like whether it's Some tanks of mine where they're almost all Java Fern, or even just like a nice cluster of Java Fern in some wood or rock, whatever. When you see it healthy and happy, man, you're just like, that's nice. That's real nice, and I did that. I'm so good. It's one of those things I love, like healthy Java Fern, man. It just makes me feel good. Makes me feel good. All right. Everyone knows Parva is the best carpet. Geek Boy, you can see yourself out. You know what you've done. Unfortunately, like, because of how slow Parva grows and how small it is, it's really easy for Sephiroms to rip that out. But yeah. Yeah. Pearl Weed or Monte Carlo, best carpeting plants in my opinion. I would personally argue, from a perspective of how easy it is to accidentally do well with it, Pygmy Chainsword is like the best. They changed its name because it used to be Echinodorus tenellum. Now I think it's... Hold on. Is it a Hemianthus now? Or it might have been a Hemianthus and got renamed. Anyway, tenellum is at the end. That's all you need to know. The small little chain sword, not the micro sword, not the like really tiny Liliopsis brasiliensis. It is a Halanthium? Yeah, Halanthinum. Whatever. I never said I was perfect at the fake Latin that we use for our plant names, okay? I just kind of vaguely sound like I know what I'm talking about. Ian Firewater. I at least have one healthy Java leaf. The rest, not so much. Oh well. You can get there, though. If you can get one, you can get two, and then you can get three, and then you can get 20. Trust me, you can get there. You can get there. Can we start a picket line for pictures of submersed plants on plant websites? So, we're going to end up going later than I wanted to. One of my long-term goals with a project has been to basically source a database of people's submerged plants so that when you look them up, it's not all of the like stock photography that's out there. It's the stuff that is under the water, the way it's going to look in your aquarium, as opposed to like the generic like here's the immersed growing parts straight from the farm, straight from the farm. This you can tell my brain is fried. I can't even speak English. Oh Lord! Remember, at one point I worked in radio, and that's how well I speak English now. It's the great Bruce Willis as Corbin Dallas in Fifth Element said. I only speak two languages, English and bad English. I mostly speak bad English now, let's be honest. All right, gang. I want to thank you all for hanging out. I hope you've really enjoyed this. Let me know if you want to see some more of this in the future. Kind of the live plant troubleshooting as I get emails or something like that. We can do our best to try and have a little fun, talk through some problems. Maybe we learn something collectively. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome. Oh, Comcast, you are the devil.